The flickering glow of the bonfire cast dancing shadows on the faces of the teenagers huddled around it. Laughter, fueled by cheap beer and Halloween high spirits, echoed through the crisp autumn night. Jack, never one to back down from a challenge, squared his shoulders and accepted. Ravenwood Manor, a place spoken of only in hushed whispers and local legends, was to be his proving ground. The dare was simple: spend one night within the crumbling walls of the abandoned manor. Yet, there was something in the way the others looked at him, a mixture of fear and fascination. Turning his back on the dwindling laughter, Jack set off into the night, the silhouette of Ravenwood Manor looming large against the horizon. The road to Ravenwood Manor was little more than a dirt track, barely visible in the weak moonlight. The further Jack walked, the denser the forest seemed to become. The sounds of the night morphed into something sinister. Each snap of a twig sent a jolt of adrenaline through Jack's veins. He found himself constantly looking over his shoulder. The silence was heavy, broken only by his heartbeat and the crunch of his boots. Jack recalled tales of Ravenwood Manor, of strange lights and unexplained noises. The trees thinned out abruptly, revealing Ravenwood Manor in all its dilapidated glory. It stood bathed in the pale moonlight, a gothic monstrosity silhouetted against the inky sky. The sight sent a shiver down Jack's spine. Summoning his courage, Jack approached the massive oak door. He hesitated, then rapped the knocker against the wood. The heavy oak door creaked open slowly, as if disturbed after a slumber lasting centuries. The sound sent a shiver down Jack's spine. He shone his flashlight into the darkness, the beam cutting through thick dust. The air was stale and heavy, thick with decay. Jack found himself in a grand foyer, now a dimly lit cavern of shadows and dust. A once magnificent chandelier hung precariously, its crystals dull and grimy. The remnants of a grand staircase, now missing steps, curved into the darkness. Whispers seemed to emanate from the shadows, sending chills down his spine. A sudden gust of wind slammed the door shut behind him, plunging him into near darkness. Jack jumped, spinning around, his heart pounding. As Jack ventured deeper into the manor, each room he entered seemed to whisper its own tale of forgotten lives and lingering sorrow. The air grew colder, raising goosebumps on his arms, despite the fact that he was bundled in a thick jacket. He could hear the wind howling outside, an eerie, mournful sound that seemed to seep through the cracks in the boarded-up windows. In the grand ballroom, where music and laughter once filled the air, now only echoes and the rustling of unseen things remained. Tattered curtains, faded by time and neglect, danced in the ghostly breeze that seemed to emanate from the boarded-up fireplace. He could almost hear the strains of a forgotten waltz, the ghostly laughter of long-gone partygoers. A sudden noise from upstairs, a floorboard creaking under an unseen weight, sent a jolt of fear through Jack. He froze, holding his breath, listening intently. The sound came again, this time closer, followed by the distinct sound of footsteps moving slowly down the hallway. Jack's blood ran cold. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he was not alone in Ravenwood Manor. Frozen in place, Jack listened. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, each one sending a tremor through the floorboards. He strained his ears, trying to pinpoint the source of the sound, but it seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. His hand tightened around the flashlight, his knuckles turning white. He felt a surge of adrenaline, the primal instinct to flee, battling with the desire to confront the source of the disturbance. Swallowing his fear, Jack slowly crept towards the foot of the grand staircase. The steps, once polished to a fine sheen, were now covered in a thick layer of dust, disturbed only by the footprints that led upwards. The footprints were small, too small to belong to an adult, and they sent a fresh wave of unease washing over him. He shone his flashlight up the staircase, the beam cutting through the darkness, but revealing nothing but more shadows and cobwebs. The air grew colder. the temperature dropping noticeably as he ascended, and Jack felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. As he reached the top of the stairs, a faint light flickered at the end of the hallway. It was a warm, inviting light, a stark contrast to the oppressive darkness that permeated the rest of the manor. Curiosity, stronger than his fear, drew him towards it, each step filled with a growing sense of dread and anticipation. The light led him to a room at the end of the hallway, its once grand double doors now hanging precariously from their hinges. A faint glow emanated from the gap between the doors, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Pushing the doors open, Jack gasped, momentarily blinded by the sight that greeted him. He found himself standing on the threshold of what was once a magnificent library. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined the walls, crammed with leather-bound volumes that spoke of forgotten knowledge and ancient secrets. A fire crackled merrily in the hearth, casting a warm, inviting glow over the room as if expecting a weary traveller. A plush armchair sat facing the fire, a book lying open on the armrest as if recently abandoned. It was a scene of such unexpected warmth and tranquility, so at odds with the decay and despair that permeated the rest of the manor, that Jack momentarily forgot his fear. He stepped into the room, mesmerized by the sight of so many books, each one a potential portal to another world, another time. He ran his fingers along the spines of the books, their titles barely visible in the dim light, their leather covers cold and slightly damp beneath his touch. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and leather, a comforting aroma that brought back memories of his grandfather's study. Drawn by an unseen force, Jack found himself drawn towards a large, leather-bound journal lying open on a nearby table. Its pages were filled with elegant cursive script, the ink faded but still legible. He ran his fingers over the words, recognizing the date, 1888, and a name scrawled across the top of the page, Emily Blackwood. He began to read, his eyes scanning the words, his mind piecing together the story they told. It was a tale of love and loss, of betrayal and madness, a glimpse into the lives of the family who had once called Ravenwood Manor home. Emily Blackwood, the journal's author, wrote of her family's fall from grace, their once vast fortunes squandered by her father's reckless investments. She wrote of her brother William, a troubled soul who disappeared without a trace, his fate a mystery that haunted the family. Her words were filled with a deep sadness, a longing for a time when Ravenwood Manor was filled with laughter and joy, not the silence and shadows that now clung to its every corner. As Jack delved deeper into the journal, he learned of the strange occurrences that began to plague the Blackwood family after William's disappearance. Unexplained noises, objects moving on their own, and fleeting glimpses of a shadowy figure that seemed to vanish into thin air. Emily dismissed these incidents as tricks of the mind, the result of her grief and the growing isolation of the manor. Emily's doubt turned to fear. She wrote of her growing suspicion that something sinister had taken root within the walls of Ravenwood Manor, something that fed on their sorrow and despair. Her words became more frantic, her handwriting more erratic, as if she herself was losing her grip on sanity. Jack paused in his reading, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel a presence in the room with him, a coldness that seemed to emanate from the shadows. He looked up from the journal, his eyes scanning the room, but he was alone. He tried to shake off the feeling, attributing it to the overactive imagination of a man alone in a haunted house. He returned to the journal, eager to learn the fate of Emily Blackwood and the secrets she held. He discovered that William, the missing heir, had been engaged to be married to a beautiful young woman named Anya. However, Anya broke off the engagement shortly before William's disappearance, claiming that she had received a series of disturbing letters warning her to stay away from Ravenwood Manor. Emily, convinced that Anya knew more about her brother's disappearance than she was letting on, confronted her. Anya, in tears, swore that she had no idea what had happened to William, but that she had been haunted by nightmares ever since she broke off the engagement. She believed that Ravenwood Manor was cursed, that a darkness had descended upon the Blackwood family. The final entry in Emily's journal sent a shiver down Jack's spine. In a shaky hand, Emily wrote of a chilling encounter she had experienced the previous night. She had been awakened by the sound of her brother's voice calling her name. She followed the sound to the library, where she found a shadowy figure standing by the fireplace. The figure turned, and for a fleeting moment Emily thought she saw William's face, twisted in a grotesque mockery of a smile. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the figure vanished, leaving behind a chilling whisper that echoed through the room. Anya. Jack closed the journal, his mind racing. He had dismissed the stories of Ravenwood Manor as mere legends, but the journal, with its detailed account of the Blackwood family's descent into madness and despair, painted a different picture. A picture of a family haunted by a darkness they could not escape, a darkness that seemed to be rooted in the very foundations of the manor itself. A sudden gust of wind slammed a window shut somewhere in the house, the sound echoing through the silence like a scream. Jack jumped, his heart pounding in his chest. He felt a cold hand on his shoulder and he spun around, his flashlight beam dancing wildly in the darkness. He was alone in the library. The fire had died down to embers, casting flickering shadows that danced on the walls. Jack took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. His gaze fell on a large portrait above the fireplace, its gilded frame tarnished with age. The portrait depicted a young woman with piercing blue eyes and a melancholic smile. Jack recognized her instantly. It was Anya, the woman William Blackwood had loved and lost. As he stared, Anya's eyes seemed to follow his every move, her smile morphing into a look of cold, calculating malice. Jack stumbled back from the portrait, his heart pounding in his ears. The name, whispered so clearly, seemed to hang in the air, thick with malice. Anya. He spun around, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, searching for the source of the voice. The library, once a haven of warmth, now felt oppressive, the shadows deeper, the silence heavier. "Who's there?" Jack called out, his voice echoing in the stillness. A sound, faint at first, drifted down from the upper floors of the manor, breaking the heavy silence. It was a child's laughter, high-pitched and innocent, echoing through the darkness. Jack froze, his blood running cold. The laughter came again, closer this time, as if the unseen child was playing a game of hide-and-seek in the shadows. Gripped by a morbid curiosity, Jack slowly made his way towards the source of the laughter. He climbed the grand staircase, each step creaking under his weight. The laughter led him down a long, narrow hallway, its walls adorned with faded wallpaper and once grand portraits. The air grew colder as he progressed, a bone-chilling cold that seemed to emanate from the very walls themselves. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest, each beat echoing in his ears. The laughter led him to a door at the end of the hallway, a simple wooden door with a tarnished brass handle shaped like a child's hand. He hesitated for a moment, his hand hovering over the handle. Taking a deep breath, he pushed the door open, the hinges groaning in protest, and stepped inside. The room was dimly lit by a single window, its glass grimy and partially boarded up. It was a child's nursery, frozen in time, as if waiting for its long-absent occupant to return. A rocking horse stood frozen mid-gallop in the center of the room. A rocking chair creaked gently back and forth, its shadow dancing on the wall. A doll lay discarded on the floor, its porcelain face cracked. Jack's flashlight beam danced across the room, illuminating a child's drawings pinned to the wall. A name scrawled in a childlike hand at the bottom of one of the drawings sent a shiver down Jack's spine. William. The laughter had stopped, replaced by an unsettling silence that seemed to press down on Jack. He stood frozen in the center of the nursery, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel a presence in the room with him, something cold and unseen, watching his every move. The rocking chair creaked again, its rhythm slow and deliberate. "William," Jack whispered, his voice barely audible above the sound of his own heartbeat. The name hung in the air, unanswered, but as he spoke, the shadows in the room seemed to deepen. A cold hand brushed against his cheek, sending a jolt of pure terror through his body. Jack recoiled, stumbling back, his flashlight beam dancing wildly across the room. The rocking chair stopped abruptly, its sudden stillness more unnerving than its rhythmic creaking. He turned and ran, his footsteps echoing on the wooden floor. He could hear the laughter again following him, taunting him. He didn't dare look back, didn't dare acknowledge the unseen presence that pursued him. He had to escape the manor, had to break free from the grip of its chilling embrace. The hallway stretched before him, seemingly endless in the flickering beam of his flashlight. Each frantic step echoed through the cavernous space, blending with the sound of his own ragged breathing. The laughter, no longer childlike but filled with a chilling malice, reverberated behind him. Panic tightened its grip on Jack's chest, making it hard to breathe. He stumbled, his foot catching on a loose floorboard, sending a jolt of pain shooting up his leg. Scrambling on his hands and knees, he felt blindly for the flashlight, his fingers closing around its cold metal casing. Jack scrambled to his feet, ignoring the throbbing pain in his ankle, and continued down the hallway. Doors, heavy and imposing, lined the hallway, each one a potential escape route. At the end of the hallway, a faint glow caught his eye. A window, its glass grimy but intact, offered a sliver of moonlight and a glimmer of hope. Reaching the window, he threw it open, the rusted hinges protesting with a screech. The night air, cold and crisp, filled his lungs, a welcome reprieve from the stale, oppressive atmosphere of the manor. His fingers closed around something cold and metallic, a drain pipe, rusted but sturdy. Jack pulled himself back inside, his gaze falling on a door he hadn't noticed before. It was tucked away at the end of the hallway, partially obscured by a tattered tapestry. Unlike the other doors, this one was locked, a heavy padlock securing it from the outside. He rattled the handle, but the door wouldn't budge. He could hear the laughter again, closer now, echoing through the hallway. Desperation surged through him. He threw himself against the door, his shoulder slamming into the heavy wood. The laughter was getting closer, accompanied by the sound of approaching footsteps. He could feel the coldness of the unseen presence, a chilling premonition of what awaited him. Frantically, he scanned the hallway, his gaze falling upon a heavy, ornate candlestick. He grabbed the candlestick, its weight surprisingly reassuring in his hand. He raised it above his head, his knuckles white, his breath catching in his throat. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the confrontation. He wouldn't go down without a fight. The laughter stopped abruptly, replaced by an eerie silence. The footsteps, however, continued their slow, steady approach, halting just outside the locked door. Jack held his breath, his entire body tense, the candlestick trembling in his grip. A voice, cold and disembodied, whispered from the other side of the door. "Let me in, Jack," the voice hissed, its tone laced with a chilling mix of sorrow and rage. Jack's grip tightened on the candlestick. "Who are you?" Jack demanded, his voice hoarse but steady. "Please," a new voice whispered, this one filled with a heart-wrenching sadness. "Help me." The padlock on the door rattled as if someone was trying to open it from the other side. "Don't let him take me," the voice pleaded, its tone laced with desperation. Jack hesitated, torn between his fear and a growing sense of empathy for the unseen voice. "Anya?" Jack whispered, his voice barely audible above the sound of his own heartbeat. "He's trapped me here," Anya's voice whispered back, the sound weak and ethereal. A surge of anger, hot and fierce, coursed through Jack. He wouldn't stand by and let this unseen entity torment Anya any longer. He didn't know how, but he would free her from this prison, even if it cost him his life. He lowered the candlestick slightly, his gaze fixed on the door. "Where are you?" he asked, his voice firm despite the tremor in his chest. "Tell me how to help you." "In the room," Anya's voice whispered back, the sound faint as if coming from a great distance. "He keeps me locked away. Find the key, Jack. It's the only way to free me." The footsteps resumed, this time moving away from the door, their rhythm slow and deliberate, fading into the depths of the manor. Jack was running out of time. He had to find the key, had to free Anya before it was too late. He had faced his fear once tonight. Now he had to face the darkness itself. Adrenaline surged through Jack's veins, a mix of fear and determination propelling him forward. The footsteps fading into the distance were a double-edged sword, a reprieve from immediate danger, but also a ticking clock. He had no idea how long he had before the entity, the he Anya had spoken of, returned. He shone his flashlight beam down the hallway, the light swallowed by the oppressive darkness. Where would a key be hidden in this sprawling, decaying manor? What room held the key to Anya's freedom? His mind raced, sifting through the fragmented clues gleaned from Emily's journal and Anya's desperate pleas. He started with the rooms closest to the locked door, each one a vignette of forgotten lives frozen in time. He rifled through dusty drawers, their contents, old letters, faded photographs, a child's forgotten toys, whispering tales of a happier time before the darkness descended upon Ravenwood Manor. Every creaking floorboard and every rustle of wind against the boarded-up windows sent a jolt of fear through him. He couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, hunted, not just by the unseen entity, but by the manor itself, its very walls imbued with the sorrow and despair of generations past. As he searched, he became aware of a soft, murmuring voice barely audible above the pounding of his own heart. At first he dismissed it as a trick of his exhausted mind, the product of fear and the oppressive atmosphere of the manor, but the voice persisted, growing stronger, clearer. "The library?" the voice whispered, its tone laced with urgency. "The key to my freedom lies within the library." Jack froze, his heart skipping a beat. It was Anya's voice, no longer weak and ethereal, but filled with a newfound strength, guiding him. He raced back down the hallway, his footsteps echoing in the stillness, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The library, once a haven of warmth and light, now felt charged with an unseen energy, the air thick with anticipation. The fire had died down to embers, casting flickering shadows that danced across the bookshelves, making the titles seem to writhe and twist as if alive. He could feel Anya's presence in the room, a palpable energy that sent shivers down his spine. "The fireplace," Anya's voice whispered, guiding him. "There's a loose brick behind the portrait of my grandmother." Jack's gaze snapped to the fireplace, drawn to the large portrait that dominated the wall above the now cold hearth. He recognized the woman in the portrait, Anya's grandmother, Emily's mother. Her stern gaze seemed to follow his every move, her lips pursed in a perpetual frown, as if disapproving of his presence in her beloved library. He pushed the heavy armchair aside, its legs scraping against the wooden floor, the sound amplified in the stillness. Climbing onto the armrest, he reached for the portrait, his fingers brushing against the cold, dusty frame. As he moved the portrait, he felt a rush of cold air, and a section of the wall behind it swung inward, revealing a dark, narrow opening. A secret passage. Anya had been right all along. Hesitantly, Jack stepped into the passage, his heart pounding in his chest. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and decay, a stark contrast to the musty scent of old books that permeated the library. He shone his flashlight ahead, the beam struggling to penetrate the thick darkness. The passage was narrow, the walls closing in on him, the ceiling so low he could feel the weight of the manor pressing down on him, threatening to crush him. He could hear the faint echo of Anya's voice urging him onward, guiding him through the darkness. After what felt like an eternity, the passage opened into a small rectangular chamber. The air here was heavy, stagnant, and Jack could feel a prickling sensation on his skin, as if he were being watched by unseen eyes. A single lantern, hanging from a rusted hook on the wall, cast flickering shadows that danced across the stone floor, revealing the outline of a heavy wooden door at the far end of the chamber. This had to be it, the room where Anya was being held captive. As Jack approached the door, he noticed a figure huddled in the corner of the chamber. The figure was shrouded in shadow, its features obscured by the flickering lantern light. Jack froze, his heart pounding in his chest. Could this be the entity that haunted Ravenwood Manor, the he Anya had spoken of? He raised the candlestick, his grip tight, his knuckles white. "Who's there?" he demanded, his voice echoing in the small chamber. The figure slowly rose to its feet, its movement stiff and unnatural, like a marionette controlled by unseen strings. As the figure stepped into the lantern light, Jack gasped, his grip on the candlestick loosening. It wasn't a monster, wasn't some grotesque creature born of darkness. It was a young man, his face pale and drawn, his eyes hollow and filled with a deep, abiding sadness. He recognized him instantly from the portrait in the library. It was William Blackwood, Anya's lost love, the missing heir of Ravenwood Manor, seemingly frozen in time, his youthful features untouched by the passage of years. But something about him was different, something unsettling. His eyes, once filled with life and laughter in the portrait, now burned with a cold, possessive intensity. "Anya," William whispered, his voice hoarse as if unused for centuries. His eyes, fixated on the door at the far end of the chamber, held a mixture of longing and despair that sent chills down Jack's spine. "She has to understand, she has to forgive me." Jack lowered the candlestick slightly, his gaze shifting between William and the heavy wooden door. He could feel Anya's presence on the other side, her fear palpable yet intertwined with a deep well of sorrow that mirrored William's own. They were connected, these two, bound by a love that transcended even death, but twisted by a darkness that threatened to consume them both. "She's afraid, William," Jack said softly, his voice echoing in the small chamber. "She doesn't understand what happened. You have to let her go." William turned his head slowly, his gaze locking onto Jack's, and for a moment Jack saw a flicker of the young man William had once been, a spark of humanity in the depths of his tormented eyes. "I can't," William whispered, his voice breaking. "She's mine. We belong together, always and forever. Don't you see? Death can't separate us. Nothing can." He took a step towards Jack, his hand outstretched, his fingers brushing against Jack's arm. The touch sent a jolt of icy fear through Jack, a coldness that seemed to seep into his very bones. "William, listen to me," Jack said, his voice firm despite the tremor in his chest. He knew he couldn't fight William, not physically. This was a battle for Anya's soul, a battle against the darkness that had consumed William and threatened to claim Anya as well. "You can't keep her trapped here. It's not right. You have to let her go." William hesitated, his gaze flickering back to the door, his expression a mixture of longing and despair. A soft sob, muffled but filled with an unbearable sadness, came from the other side of the door, and William visibly shuddered. "Do you love her, William?" Jack asked, the question echoing in the silence of the chamber. William's head snapped up, his eyes meeting Jack's with an intensity that was both terrifying and heartbreaking. "Do you truly love her?" Jack repeated, his voice gaining strength. William's hand, still hovering in the air, slowly clenched into a fist. "More than life itself," he whispered, his voice raw with unshed tears. "But she left me. She chose another. I couldn't bear it, I wouldn't." The words tumbled out of him, filled with a pain so profound, so ancient, that Jack could feel the weight of it pressing down on him, threatening to suffocate him. "She didn't choose another, William," Jack said, his voice firm, resolute. "She was afraid. She didn't understand, but you can show her. You can let her go." A struggle passed over William's face, a battle between the darkness and Anya's love. The lantern flickered, casting grotesque shadows. Then the darkness lifted. William's form wavered, becoming translucent. He reached out a hand towards Jack. In his palm lay a simple iron key. "Free her," William whispered, fading into the silence.